Welcome to Pillar Talk with Rochelle, where authentic people share real stories focusing on one of the 12 pillars in my book, Simply Complex, Leading Out of Authenticity. I am your host, Rochelle Armstrong, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, this is Rochelle with Pillar Talk, and today I have an amazing guest with us, Daniel. Now, Daniel, is your last name Melson?
It is Melson. I'm so used to people messing it up. Usually if somebody says Nelson, I just go with the flow, but it is Melson. M as in mother. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, well, I just want you to know it is such an honor to have you on the podcast. Like, I'm so random. So just to give our listeners a little background information about how this even happened, a couple of weeks ago, it was my husband's birthday. And we went to First Watch for lunch, brunch, whatever you want to call it. And Daniel was there. And I don't want to start throwing out titles. So I'll let you share that side of the story. But he was there with someone and we were there. And Daniel was so kind to buy my husband lunch for his birthday. Like, I was taking him out for his birthday. But while we were there, and look, let me be honest. First, my husband said he texted, like, why don't you all come over and join us? And I think Jamel's response was, well, my wife is taking me out. You know, she kind of wanted to spend some time with me. But, you know, one of the things I always say, Daniel, is people will show you who they are when you tell them no. So I knew that you were really a good guy, that even once he said no, you still were kind and gracious enough to like treat him to lunch. Yeah. And that matters to me because people are quick to like you and like they're all on your side, or they really support you whenever you're saying yes to them. But I think it's a certain type of integrity and genuineness when someone says no, and you still was like, no, let me get their lunch. And so I just want to say thank you.
No problem.
All right, so Daniel, I don't know a lot about you over lunch. Jamel did share a little bit of your story, so I was intrigued, which is why I wanted you to come on the podcast today. And so, just a quick intro: the pillar will be environment, correct?
Yep.
So before we get into the pillar, let's talk a little more about you, Daniel. Tell us a little more about yourself.
Okay. Again, my name's Daniel Melson. Grew up here in Louisville, Kentucky, as we say, Louisville, Kentucky. I did grow up in the Portland neighborhood and the West End. Let me see. I was a social worker for years. I'm actually a grad student now at Spalding University, finishing my master's in social work. I worked with juvenile justice for some years, just a lot of experience working as a youth pastor with teenagers. And just working kind of in the field of social work for the last 15 years. I did currently stop that while I'm in school and actually started a company, or 50% shareholder of a company, about 6 months ago. So I'm in this new entrepreneur stage of my life that I'm trying to adjust to. So that's kind of a quick, brief summary of me.
No, and thank you for sharing that. And as a fellow entrepreneur, I too am new to entrepreneurship. So hopefully beyond this podcast, you and I can connect. I don't know about you, but I find it lonely sometimes being an entrepreneur. You know, you just want to bounce ideas or brainstorm. And I'm still trying to find like, who are my people? Who is my tribe? Like for that sort of stuff. And so even when I have guests on, one of the reasons why I always say it's an honor is A, that you took your time to come on the podcast, but B, sharing your story. I learn from each of you. And as I'm listening selfishly, I'm thinking of ways I can connect. And so hearing you talk about going to Spalding, like I got my degree in business and communication at Spalding. So I was like, woohoo for Spalding. And then I have a lot of respect and admiration for social workers. And so I'm going to get all into your business today. And so I just wanted our guests to hear a little more about you before I start asking really targeted questions. Okay. And so I noticed you said that you did grow up in Louisville.
I did, yes, ma'am.
In the West End.
Yes, ma'am.
And Portland, more specifically.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
So I don't like to assume, for our listeners, when you talk about environment, are you going to talk about like the environment that you were raised in, or like the environment that you work in? And I don't want to kind of probe and lead you, but did you have a
Hmm.
specific direction you wanted to go into?
I think environment includes my sub dorms and subculture. So I would think my environment where I grew up in, and then maybe further on as we progress or evolve in the discussion, it could lead to those others.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of times it's easier if you go back to the beginning.
Hmm.
And so why don't you just kind of paint a picture of what did your environment look like when you were growing up, Daniel?
Okay. I would have to speak on family context as well, because
Okay.
that shapes the environment, the household. Um,
Absolutely.
my father was sentenced to 300 years in 1987, um, alleged in organized crime. Um, so my mother was pregnant with me when that happened, when he was sentenced. So we grew up. My mom was on welfare. We grew up in a poverty-stricken area. Uh, my mom kind of grew up in the same neighborhood, so it was kind of a generational type environment. She was a single mom on welfare. Um, in my neighborhood also consisted of the three most low performing schools. So elementary was J.B. Atkinson, which at that time was a low performing school. Western Middle School, which at the time was a low performing school, and Shawnee High School. So my environment, of course, in my neighborhood, there was, the drugs, there was violence, but then also my own family context was influence built on, I call it gangsterism or masculinity.
Okay.
So that's kind of a quick just picture of kind of how that looked coming into the world.
Wow. So, excuse me. First of all, today, like present day, how is your dad doing?
He's doing well. He served 31 years state and then 33 years time because of the Obama administration. Some laws changed, so he was actually able to get released after 34 years.
Okay.
Yeah, he made parole. He was never eligible for parole until the Obama administration. So, regardless of political affiliation, shout out to Barack Obama for
Okay.
that. Uh,
That's right.
but uh, uh, but definitely, I was told that he would never get out. Um, that was always a hope and a wish in my heart, just because I wanted to at least experience that. Because most of our relationships was through Securus, which people who don't know, Securus is a um, uh, third party company that you're able to communicate through inmates by
Yes.
phone, and then because of who he was, they shipped him out of state. And I think 1992 they shipped him to New Mexico
Wow.
because of numerous of things, which I'm not going to get into. Um, so even going to visit him was hard. I would have to, it was, I think I didn't even really see him again until I had some pictures when I seen him when he was at Eddyville. Eddyville is Kentucky's own maximum security prison. So before they shipped him out, he was there. I think I was maybe 2 when I would go get to see him. But then after that, I didn't get to physically see him until I graduated high school, which was 17. We actually went down to New Mexico. But throughout that time, most communication was through letters and was phone calls. Then I had family who was hesitant to have a relationship with him because of who he is, and they didn't, because of my environment, they didn't want to see me um, have his ideology versus my environment. Is probably wasn't a good mix at that time. But with that being said, I was able to still cultivate that relationship during that time.
I so appreciate you saying that. And I can relate to your story intimately and personally. So I thank you. It's interesting, Daniel, because just today, now I'm not even sure if we're social media friends. I doubt that we probably are. But the only pillar that has not been discussed on the podcast is DNA. Now, I've
Mm,
heard it touched on when people talk about environment. What I'm not going to do to your interview is turn this into DNA, because as you
yeah.
stated, to talk about your environment, you had to touch on your DNA. But I just want to applaud you just for your courage to be able to talk about it and share. But I think it's this type of authenticity and this type of realness is what inspire other people who may be ashamed and don't want to share their story. And so I shared my story, not to shame anyone, but to
Mhm.
encourage people like me, or to help people who can't relate to people like us see a different, maybe perception, or see a different side of people who are on the other side of this. And
Mhm.
so I had no idea
Mhm.
before this interview that you were going to share that. I had no idea, what your dad had went through. But as you stated, allegedly, I don't know the
Mhm.
story, so it's not for me to judge. I know I don't want to be judged. And so out of
Mhm.
genuine concern, it was important to ask, how's your dad doing today? And the last question I'll just ask on the topic so we can move on to the actual environment is, do you and your dad have a relationship today?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I noticed you said the last time you saw him when you were younger were like 2 years old, but then once you got older, like you were interested in
Yep.
having a relationship.
I actually picked him up from federal prison in Arkansas, which is where Ti used to be locked up. For those who love hip hop, but yeah, I drove out there and picked him up, and we've been cultivating it. We've had some discussions on upon discussions about things, all kinds of sort of things. But it's just a blessing just to experience that, because again, I mean, no one ever thought that he would be released. Not so much of what he's done, but just because of allegedly who he is.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, maybe on a future episode, if I don't get anyone to sign up for DNA, maybe you can come back. And I realize because of the sensitive nature, you won't be able to get into a lot of details about his story, but I
Mm.
have like probing questions even about your
Okay.
mom and how she handled the situation, et cetera, et cetera. But staying true to today's topic, environment, tell us a little more about how did that environment, and I'm going to focus on just negatively first. So you
Okay.
mentioned like the school system, you
Hmm.
mentioned like poverty. So tell
Hmm.
us a little more, how did that shape you negatively, maybe over the years?
So I guess we can on the topic of poverty. Um, I think you can only achieve by what you can see. So basically, you're only influenced by what you see. So I feel like the level of expectation, not only generationally, but family and just an environment, there's a low expectation put on people, which we call classism. But
Yes.
there's an expectation put on people, and I think you grow into that identity. I think that becomes a part of who you are without you knowing it. Um, and then also, again, you kind of just emulate what you see. You know, I mean, there's so many different aspects to view poverty, but when you're growing through it and growing out of it, I mean, from finances to credit, I mean, even the welfare system, it's not a. It can be used as a tool, but also it creates a level of dependency if it's
Mhm.
if it's abused.
Correct.
So there's a level of dependency too that you kind of learn that you don't even realize that you learn as well. Um, it's kind of it turns into a mentality, really. I mean, really, poverty is a mentality um,
Mhm.
that's shaped by the environment. And again, there's micro and macro issues that influence that. But poverty, you do adapt to your environment. And poverty. I think the second component to the question was you asked about the school system.
Yes.
Yeah. So, our schools growing up were pretty hard, pretty hard. I always compare my high school experience because I ended up working at a juvenile detention center here in Louisville before we closed. That's why I worked there for years. But there's a lot of similarities between the school and kind of the justice system. Um, I would say more from my peers, because you have all these different kids who go through trauma, the effects of the trauma, family trauma, personal trauma, all these different levels of trauma that are help shaping these kids. You put them
Yes.
into one environment, you're going to have issues. So
Absolutely.
you're kind of on a fight or flight at a younger age, which I didn't know. I didn't know what anxiety was at that age, but I knew that, I mean, kids were gonna, joke on you and ride you out, so you had to learn how to defend yourself in so many
Yes.
different ways. So it kind of developed a fight or flight, and then that low expectation. I mean, the poverty and the school kind of go hand in hand, because schools normally who are in those type of areas are low performing schools. Um, so they kind of correlate. But just that low expectation in the school system where people, even teachers, they try to push you, but you can tell there was a low expectation as a student. Just touching on those two components that you asked.
No, thank you for sharing that because I can relate. Again, we may have more of a similar background than I've had maybe with any other guest. And so it's going to be really hard for me to only participate and ask questions and not to really want to share my story as well. But one of the things I wanted to ask, when you talk about that low expectation, and when you talk about like maybe sometimes teachers really didn't expect you to thrive, you knew that. Like even as a child, you knew that existed.
I knew it existed, but I couldn't diagnose it until I was older. Now that I look back, I can diagnose it. When I was in it, I knew it, but I didn't know what that it was, but exactly. I knew that it was happening. Yeah.
So let me ask you, did you buy into it or did you work harder to not be what they said you were not going to be or what you were going to be because of your poverty and your background?
At the time, I don't think either or. I think I was just operating on my existence. Mm-hmm. I was definitely a problem child. So, but now I look back, my issues and my problems had a lot to do with not only my DNA, but my environment, my family structure. I mean, when I hear the word environment in social work, we're taught about subnorms and subcultures.
Yeah.
So our environment can be any of those things and all of those things. So when you have a kid who comes from, generational abuse, when there's abuse in the home, when dad's gone, when there's poverty, you just have this melting pot of social issues. Mm-hmm. And, kids don't ask to be brought into the world, but they're brought into this. So they're shaped by these experiences and these environments and these subcultures. So you have a kid who goes to school who's dealing with the trauma effects of all these different things. They're going to act out.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to act out. So, I think really when I correlated the school system to the juvenile justice system is I think schools are more focused on behavior modification than us actually evolving. So they just knew, look, Daniel might get suspended this week, or you might have to pick up your son this week. So it was more of a behavior thing. But now that I'm a social worker, it was always Band-Aids. They never targeted trauma. It was always Band-Aid, like, suspending kids from school doesn't change what they got to go home to, or it doesn't change the effects of trauma on the brain. So yeah.
When I hear you talk about that, the first thing that came to mind, first of all, are teachers equipped to deal with that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I know they have to go through like certain levels of certification to teach like educationally. But in terms of like behavior, and we know that there's a lot of issues even with that, like the suspension rate of like minorities and Black students, opposed to maybe just putting them in some type of in-school suspension or some type of program, like you said, to remedy the problem instead of just getting rid of them. Like they're acting out. There is no interest as to why they're acting out, but I don't want to assume that there's no interest. Is it lack of training? Is it lack of time? Like if you have this classroom full of 22, maybe the 28 students, and I'm just hypothetically speaking, like, are they well equipped? Do they have the necessary skills and certifications to be able to manage that? And I don't know about you, but I do know some faculty and staff, teachers, et cetera. And I'm not sure that I asked these questions. Maybe I can get a school teacher on here so that we can talk about it, because it's disheartening. Because I too was that student. My son was that student. And I felt like I didn't really have the resources or the help. But I don't know if it was the teacher's responsibility or did they have what it took in order to do whatever we needed from them. I don't want to make that assumption. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that it takes I think if you're going to decide to, because teachers know where they want to teach at, right? Mm-hmm. For the most part. I mean, you
get to choose.
Right. So if you choose to continue to teach at a school that's going to be in a neighborhood like that, I think there's some culture things that you need to learn. And also, I do have friends who are teachers that have been on both sides. So they've been that kid and then became teachers. And
Yeah.
those type of people know how to connect on a certain level. There's a difference between academics and experience. But I feel like if you can gravitate towards more people who have both, it's a greater impact. It's just like when I start working with juveniles, because I'm from the environment and I made similar mistakes. I was able to connect with them than somebody who just showed up in the door with a bachelor's in criminal justice.
Correct.
So I have a bachelor's in criminal justice, but I also have experience. So I'm able to correlate both of those. It's the same thing with teachers. I just think they need to be selective on who they put in there. And I think they do need to not only use education, but what kind of experiences do you have? I'm not saying you have to grow up in an environment, but there's just we talk about the school system. We can sit here and talk for 3 days. But I do think they need to hire people who understand culture.
Yes.
Not who's going to learn culture, somebody who already knows culture.
Okay.
Because we're not an experiment, so you don't come in and try to learn from us. So I do feel like they need to do a better job at targeting and hiring teachers who are more equipped by experience and education.
Agreed. No, and I think that's nicely stated. So one of the things I try to do is be non-judgmental and give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes it's not for entertainment though. Like sometimes it's more entertaining to have a position, or it's even more thought-provoking to take a stance on a particular thing. And so what I try to be careful of is not to speak on things or people who, if I don't know the complete story, I'm just cautious. Right. But I do think you have a right to your opinion. I do think that you have a right to be able to speak to something that has impacted you personally and so many people that you know. And so I am going to do further research. I do want to talk to some teachers about this particular topic because I was a little different, maybe. Like when I talk about growing up and being a student, I too came from that poverty. I came from the low, expectations of our schools. And for some reason, Daniel, I understood even at a young age, like people's perception of people like me. So I was a teenage mom. And not only was I a teenage mom, but I was a Black girl. And I knew how people looked at me. And so I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy trying not to be a statistic, trying not to be what I thought people thought I was going to be or not going to be because of my background. And even as a parent, I touched on DNA. I can see where I put pressure on our older 2 kids to be able to show up a certain type of way because I had a sense of pride that I didn't want people thinking a certain type of way of people like us. Now, as I've matured and grown, I don't want anybody to live that way. It's too much pressure. You shouldn't have to. My existence and who I am and me showing up should just be good enough. I shouldn't have to try to dispel or try to make you change how you think about people once you know my story. That's a reflection of you, not me. Yep. But for years, I didn't want people to have this negative stereotype, or I didn't mind telling my story, but it was important to prove to people that everyone who came from this background is not a statistic. Don't turn out this way. And based on what you've shared at your age, you really didn't even think about it. You were just surviving. You were just trying to manage life like the best you could. And it was never a thought, but just like you, I knew what people were thinking, what teachers were thinking, or what their expectations were. And I worked really hard to try to dispel those. And so now that we talked a little bit about the negative side of the environment, as I think about where you're at today and all the things that you've accomplished, let's talk about how that same environment impacted you positively.
I think several different ways. Again, going back to my thought process on teachers, I do bring a level of experience to that. I will say that I feel very driven because I always used to share this with people. And again, this is just me, but just experiences like tasting powdered milk.
Yes.
Like I still taste it, but that stuff like that, like tangible experiences.
Yes.
is what drives me to work so hard.
Yeah.
Now there is balance in that, and I've learned a balance of not being a workaholic and faith being the most important thing. But it's those experiences that has drove me, because I want to get away from that as much as I can. So in
Agreed.
life, that it's like, and how I view my life is like I'm doing everything that I can to run away from that. But
Mm.
running away means evolving, because
Yeah.
I don't want to be stuck in that. So um, normally it can either break you, which it has, in a lot of aspects it has broken me. But I try to use it as my driving force, because because I've seen the effects of classism. As I got older in my middle school and high school, like I understood the effects of classism and people putting you in that box and being labeled as an at-risk youth. So we're going to
Yeah.
lower our expectation. So all of that now looking back is what kind of drives me in social work. It kind of what drives me in entrepreneurship, to create jobs, not only jobs, but good paying jobs, because
Yeah.
we're not helping people if we're paying people $9 an hour.
That's right.
So just there's a level of empathy and sympathy that I have, that my environment that's helped me serve better, and also love people to a more deeper level.
Agreed. No, I think that is perfectly stated. And, when I was listening to you, just talking about that, it's that, ooh, I never heard anybody put it like that. But when you talked about that powdered milk, I remember standing in line for free cheese. I know you can relate to that, like the
Yeah.
box of cheese that you would get in the particular neighborhood. So I grew up like in the Smoketown area, and as you're talking, it's nostalgic because it's kind of bringing up memories for me. It was like on 7th Street. I think it's where like Simmons College is at now. I
Okay.
want to say it was like that area that we would walk with my grandmother. And I don't know about you, but I remember being so embarrassed. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can look back today and be like, who are you to even be embarrassed? Your grandmother stepped up and raised you. Like, who are you to even be embarrassed? But as a child, I was. Because again, I was like highly aware of like my surroundings. So not only was I like self-aware, but socially aware. So I knew,
Mm-hmm.
like, have you ever heard people say, I didn't know I was poor? Like how
Yeah.
they grew up, they would say, I didn't even know I was poor. It wasn't until X, Y, and Z. But from what I'm hearing from you and what I'm saying is, I knew I was poor. Like,
Yeah.
so I was that level of poor that it was understood and I knew that. But I think I hear a similarity in what drove us to do better. And I'm like you, I don't really like that term at risk. So I work a lot with, and I have to change the language instead of saying at risk youth who are at risk. And I was one of
Mm-hmm.
those. And maybe there's a more honoring word or term that we can use.
Yeah.
But we do want to catch them because we know the difference that mentors and people who have walked in their shoes, like you can
For
make a
sure.
difference.
For
And so
sure.
I just want to thank you, for the work that you're doing in the community and the jobs that you're providing. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's simply amazing. And as we talked about earlier, maybe before we hit record, is we're both trying to figure out entrepreneurship. But I know
Mm-hmm.
one of my aspirations is to be able to provide jobs as well. And I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what that's going to look like today. But again, we can connect, after
Yeah.
the interview. And so,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, um, when you think about the environment, and let's say once you graduated from high school, was it encouraged for you to go on to college or like to take a type of trade or something after graduating?
I did, but I didn't believe in myself, because I was one of those people who I normalized my environment.
Okay.
So my environment is what it was, and I didn't know that. Now looking back, I did. So I was 19 years old, still drinking powdered milk.
Oh,
I
wow.
was I was still going to the food closet. So I didn't even go to college until I was 25 years old. I'm 34 now.
I get it.
Um, but it was during that time. My faith is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I got saved in my senior year in high school, so that kept me, because if I wouldn't have got saved then, the mental health issues and things that I had to I went through a difficult season for a few years where I had really bad anxiety and depression. I was in mental hospitals, trying to commit suicide, um, because once I came out of high school and I started learning like this is what life is. So I didn't have a license, I didn't have a car, so I didn't. The only hope that I had to hold on to was Jesus.
Yes.
And it was during that time that I learned gradually how to get away from religion into a relationship, because suffering, how no matter what it looks like, suffering will cultivate a prayer life. And
Yeah.
it was the prayer, it was me cultivating that relationship and being passionate about Jesus in my prayer time that that I'm seeing the fruit of 15 years later. But but I will say that, you know, I had to learn. So I knew I wanted to, but I didn't believe. So I used to share this story. I had friends who ended up going to college, and you know, we could stay there for free. They could have guests. So I remember getting on the TARC, which is, you know, Louisville's bus transportation.
Yes.
And I would get there hoping that, like, wishing, I was like, I wish I could do that, but I didn't believe I could do any. You know, I knew at the time, I knew I loved Jesus. I knew I wanted to help people, but I didn't believe. And I always tell people who's thinking about college is not for smart people. You're going to college to learn.
That's
So
right.
I was going thinking I already had to be fully equipped, but I didn't. So when I enrolled in college, I had to take all 100 courses. I had to take 100 writing, 100 math, all those things. So I had to learn those things all over again. But I know I really didn't. You know, at one point in my life before I was converted, I wanted to be like my dad. But I knew it wasn't who I was. I remember having an FBI Most Wanted poster in my room, and actually in my locker. You know what I'm saying? Because I was trying to figure out who I was, but I knew I wasn't being real, because I always had a loving heart. But because of my environment, because of that fight or flight, I had to put up a wall to protect myself. It's kind of like the shell of a turtle.
Yeah.
Like that was my shell. People looked at me. I had the gold teeth. I had everything else, but I was really broken, depressed, and hopeless. But I wanted to use that shell as a way to keep myself safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Jesus, he is it, you know, for me too. And again, you know, Daniel, I really want to reach out and want to help or inspire or encourage all people. For me, I know some people are like Christian writers, or they only focus on Christian. I don't believe that's what God has called me to. For me personally, is to love all people and to love all people well. What I will say unapologetically, I would never denounce God or to denounce Christ, because my mere existence is because of him. There is no way you would take a teenager like you, a teenager like me, and we make it to be this age without him.
For sure.
Like, I started out really young. I remember getting my first apartment when I was like 16. And when I think back, and it was like a few weeks ago at church, they started singing the song, Jesus Loves Me. And I just started crying and just started weeping. I remember profusely, because I know that from personal experience.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry when people don't know him like we know him. But I get that people don't like organized religion. And I understand why some people don't go to church, because they've been hurt by the church. But for me, I can never turn my back on Christ, because he's always been with me. And so I don't get into debates. I didn't go to seminary. Like, I don't know all the theological terms. I can't give you all the scriptures, but he's real to me, because I know that he's kept me. He speaks to me. And I know that he continues to care for me. And so for that, I will forever be grateful. And so as I listen to you, you know, just as someone who, gosh, Daniel, I don't think I realized that when you were talking, you said you're 34 now.
Yep.
So you had this really pivotal change. You said maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah, I got saved in 2004. So it was this is 2000. So over 10 years ago. But everything, saved, my transition from high school to adulthood, I had all these changes. And like I said, it was those times when I went through my mental health issues because of my environment, because of the influence of mainstream society that tells you that you need to be this certain way, or that you need to achieve this. I didn't feel like I was equipped to achieve those things. So there was a couple years that I went through real bad anxiety and depression. But when desperate people do desperate things. So,
Yes.
when I was desperate, I just wanted some hope. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why I gravitated, like you said, loving all people, but that's why I gravitated towards the hope that I have today.
Well, and I think it's important to share that for people. Because sometimes people see your joy or they see your light. Like I see your light. I think it's important to let people know where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's not from the textbook or like you said, I went to school. I love how you said you go to school to learn. Smart people don't go to school. But see, that's where I feel like I have audacity. And I feel like the only person I got that from was God, because coming from my background and where I came from, I don't really, because like you said, you got to see it to see it. So I didn't really see it. Now, in all due respect, because I did have aunts and uncles who were professionals, who were teachers, who were nurses, and so I got to see how we would define professionalism, I guess. But for me personally, because I did move out so young and had my own family at a very young age, working hard meant something. But I knew that I wanted to go to school. Like I remember my high school counselor asking, well, what do you want to go to school for? And I was like, law. And she was like, oh, okay. So I'm going to say this, the teachers I had were really encouraging. Family, friends in the community, aunts and uncles, like my family believed in me. Like they never really told me I couldn't be anybody or I wasn't anything. They would always kind of encourage me. If I said I'm going to be a lawyer, they would be like, yeah, you can. And let me help you fill out this paperwork and make that happen. And so maybe, that's where some of the audacity came from, but it was lonely at times. Like you said, I experienced depression at times. I didn't know what anxiety was either. So like naturally, I'm very introverted and very shy. Anytime I have to speak in front of someone, even in this context or this platform, I'm nervous before I have to do it. And the more I talk and the more we get into it, my nerves kind of dissipate and I'm good. But I remember being in college and having a public speaking class and the first assignment being next week, you got to give a 5-minute presentation. And I remember going to my advisor, dropping the class. Because I was thinking, I'm not going to talk in front of people. How are you going to be an attorney and you're not going to talk in front of people? But what I'm saying and what I'm hearing from you is I didn't have it all figured out.
Yeah.
But with my faith, with some guidance, I was able to find a different path than the one that was originally set for me.
And we definitely had good teachers who did believe in us and were well. But I think there was a part of our environment that for some of us, not all of us, we just didn't believe in what they seen in us.
Yeah. Ooh, say that again.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say that again.
I'll say it for you. You said, I'm not sure that we believe in what they saw in us. That's something different, isn't it?
So it took mentors. It took people like your husband, who I used to meet with a lot for coffee. People like him and people like that for years. Like I've been meeting, not to get on the topic of your husband, but I've been meeting with him for years. Like this is somebody I've stayed in touch with, and I've been blessed enough to have people who like people like him, who has poured into my life, been a foundation. And there were seasons where I went to the opposite of God, where I was like, I'm doing my own thing for these couple of years, but I was miserable and whatever. And I'm trying to figure stuff out. God gave me grace, but I am blessed enough to say that regardless of me not believing in myself, I did have people around me. God put people around me that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And having that safe space to have those conversations. And having people like that. So it's the same thing you said. I think you mentioned it before, but I want to be what others have been to me, because I know that I know how much it makes a difference, regardless of faith, regardless of any of that. People are people, and people deserve to be loved and encouraged and have that. But through those experiences, I just be able to be that person, like your husband and others who provided that to me. So I want to provide that to other people.
How beautiful. Well, with that being said, what advice would you give someone who's listening to this podcast, who has either walked a mile in your shoes, they feel hopeless, they're depressed, they're struggling with anxiety. You're making it, because I don't know about you. I feel like the work is still being done. I'm not completely who I'm supposed to be, if I
For
ever
sure.
will be. So as
For
you're
sure.
becoming this man that you know that you're created to be, what advice would you give someone who was you over 10 years ago?
If it was my message, if it's something that I would
Your
say,
message, yes.
okay, I would just say, like, take away religion, take away organized religion, take away Western Christianity, take
Okay.
away, which is a whole different discussion, but the man Jesus Christ is who he said he is, regardless. And it doesn't matter. Like, the thing I was thinking about, we talked about environments. I thought about in the book of Acts, 17 verse 26, where God basically determined our environment so that we can seek him and find him.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like, God knows where we're at. But what I can
Yes.
say, that looking back now, that hope in him, he's what kept me. I didn't keep myself. I've tried to do the opposite thing. I've tried to live with a girl and trying to do things outside of God's will. It never worked. Even coming into this, I thought about how could I relay a message. It's kind of like, for people who's ever drunk alcohol, you kind of get drunk and you kind of throw up and you get the hangover and you don't want to drink that again. Like, I had
No.
times in the past, like, I don't want to drink Hennessy anymore because of what it did to me that one time. So I'm at a place now where I look at that as my life, where I try to do my own will. And every time I try to do my own will, I get hungover and I throw up. So I'm just at a place where if I could talk to somebody, it's like, man, like, just follow him, regardless of what society tries to define what success is, regardless of American culture, the American dream, regardless of any of that. Just follow him.
I am so filled right now. I know I have to let you go, but I could listen to you all day, Daniel.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be selfish. You already told me this is your off day. So I'm going to be very respectful of your time. But if people wanted to reach you, how can they contact you? Can you give us some of your contact information?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook, Daniel Melson, Daniel Melson. You can DM me if you have any questions, or contact information or number or anything. My company's website is Trinity. So one word, trinityexecutivecleaning.com. We do commercial cleaning. We do offices, dental offices, doctor offices, schools. Again, you can find me on Facebook, and we can go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's so needed. And so one of the things I tried not to do during your interview that I did a lot in season 1, I took a lot of notes, but I would still listen to the interview and I would capture notes in order to write a description about the interview itself. And so I want to enjoy the interviews a lot more. And so I'm thinking you're going to go back and listen to it anyway. So I'm not taking all those notes, or as many notes today. But I like to end things on a positive note. And so one of the things I'm going to start doing is asking a serious question that's really near and dear to me. So I'm going to tell you where I'm going at with this. So you talked about many ways to escape, and maybe some unhealthy ways of escaping, and then some very healthy ways. Well, one of my happy places is to eat dessert. So my favorite dessert, or favorite dessert, if you will, are cupcakes. And a matter of fact, and this is like free promotion for Abby Girls in Cincinnati, Ohio, they have some of my favorite cupcakes. So to end things on a light note, what is your favorite dessert, Daniel?
Cheesecake, and it's new. I used to not like cheesecake when I was younger. I thought it was just dumb. But now that I'm older, it's like I can't. It's like I like exactly what you said. If I got a hard test, or if I got something I need to do, it's kind of like my stress reliever. I like people's personal businesses where they sell them, or different companies that sells them. But yeah, I love cheesecake for
So
sure.
can I tell you something? You got something in common with Jamel, because cheesecake is his favorite dessert also.
We're gonna grab some cheesecake soon for sure. I'm gonna text him as soon as we get off here. Yep.
Right. He calls himself a purist. So he just likes the original cheesecake, nothing on it. Like you can keep the strawberries, you can keep the cherries. But yeah, it's definitely like for me, a good cupcake, watching like a lighthearted movie. That's kind of my stress reliever or my go-to. So I said I'm gonna start asking my guests, like, what's your favorite dessert? So
I like that.
cheesecake.
Yeah,
And
for
so I
sure.
just want to wish you well. So you're in grad school. How much time
Yep.
do you have left?
I'm hoping to be done before summer. I took a
Okay.
semester and I took a semester in summer off. So I'm actually just returned back this semester. So I'm in my concentration year, so I should have 2 semesters left.
Nice. So what's your aspiration? Once you, because you're an entrepreneur, you got a lot going on, Daniel. So what do
Yeah.
you want to do after you get your degree?
Obtain my LCSW, so I'll be a licensed therapist.
Nice.
Um, but then I want to take what I'm learning with entrepreneurship and apply that to my LCSW. So I would love to do, public speaking. I would love to do circles, community groups, one-on-one therapy. I just want to be able to cultivate like a safe space for people to talk.
Absolutely. Well, you're going to do all those things even before your degree. So I'm sure after listening to this interview, you will probably get some requests for public speaking. You're a phenomenal speaker, but your life story and just the passion and conviction that you speak with, they're coming for you, Daniel. So I just want to thank you again for being on the podcast. And I just want to encourage you to continue to lead out of authenticity.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for tuning in to Pillar Talk with Rochelle. Authentic people, real stories. Rochelle Armstrong, leading authentically.